They told you Africa was violent, but they never told you why. They showed you images of war, but they erased the hands that lit the fire. They called it chaos. They called it tribal hatred. They called it savagery. But what if the most barbaric thing about Africa's wars was not the fighting, but the silence that followed? Tonight, we open the files they closed. We speak the names they erased. This is the Africa that history tried to bury. Africa's wars did not begin with Africans. They began on tables in Europe. Men who had never stepped on African soil took rulers and sliced nations apart. One ethnic group split into 3 countries. Historical enemies forced to live under one flag. Languages trapped inside foreign borders. When independence came, Africa didn't inherit peace. It inherited time bombs. And when those bombs exploded, the world blamed Africans for the blast. But the fuse was lit thousands of miles away, by people who never had to live with the consequences of their lines on a map. They drew borders in blood, then condemned the continent for bleeding. This wasn't a failure of African leadership. It was the intended outcome of colonial design. In the heart of Africa lies the Congo, a land so rich it became a curse. Rubber, gold, diamonds. And coltan, the mineral that powers the phone you might be holding right now. To extract this wealth, entire villages were erased. People were punished not for rebellion, but for not producing fast enough. Hands were severed, not in some act of madness, but as a cruel form of accounting. Much later, the wars returned. Militias were funded and weapons were supplied from outside. Millions died. The headlines simply read civil war, but the money funding the conflict never came from the Congo. It flowed from international corporations and foreign powers who saw the chaos as a business opportunity. They profited from the violence while the Congolese people paid the ultimate price. Some African wars had no soldiers, only children. Children kidnapped from their homes, drugged and given guns heavier than their own bodies. They weren't taught to fight enemies. They were taught to destroy their own villages, burning every bridge so they could never return home. This wasn't warfare. It was the systematic destruction of a generation's soul. By the time the news cameras finally arrived, the children were already broken. The world saw them and called them monsters. No one bothered to call them what they were, victims. They were the smallest casualties of a war started by the biggest players, used as disposable tools in a game they never understood. After the wars came the silence. No international trials for the masterminds, no apologies, no compensation for the millions of lives destroyed. Instead, books were rewritten, archives were locked away, blame was reassigned. They took the word genocide and reduced it to ethnic conflict. They took invasion and called it regional instability, and Africa was left to mourn quietly because its loud, honest grief makes powerful people uncomfortable. This erasure is the final act of violence, an attempt to bury the truth so that the same crimes can be committed again. The perpetrators weren't just forgiven. Their role in history was deleted. The most horrifying thing about Africa's wars is not how brutal they were. It's how profitable they were for others. War funded economies on other continents. Conflict fed the global arms industry. Instability kept control cheap and resources easy to plunder. And every time Africa bled, someone else, somewhere far away, always cashed the check. The narrative of a self-destructing continent was a convenient lie, a smokescreen to hide a century of calculated exploitation. The chaos was never the problem. For some, it was the business plan. Africa is not cursed. Africa was and is targeted, and until this full truth is spoken, loudly and clearly, the cycle continues. This channel exists to break that silence, to name what was hidden, to remember what was erased. Follow our channel, because history doesn't just disappear. It waits for someone brave enough to tell it. Thanks for watching.